The silk curtain moved, not from wind, but from breath. That kind of breath that doesn't belong to you, yet you feel it on your collarbone. The villa was glazed in light. Not morning light. This was something humid, golden, slow. Like it crawled through the shutters rather than poured. The kind of light that knows too much. I remember the moment not as a thought, but as a texture. My bare heel grazing the cool marble, the soft hiss of linen along my thigh, and a sweetness in the air that didn't come from fruit. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not alone. Not watched. Not watched. Had NNTHE screens had been cleaned. The surfaces too perfect. It smelled like money trying to cover something. Bleach and bergamot. But beneath that, in the crevices of the villa, was the weight of something recorded. The pool outside didn't ripple. It held its breath, just like I did. What does it mean to look at yourself from the outside? Not metaphorically. Literally. Pixel by pixel. To know that somewhere, someone has already seen what you haven't done yet. NNTHE camera was hidden, badly. Behind a sculpture, tilted too precisely. I saw it when I reached for the bottle of water. A slight glint. A presence. A watching. I didn't flinch. That was my first instinct. Not to flinch. Because if you flinch, it means you know. So I poured the water. Slow, deliberate. Letting the cold fill the glass like a performance. If I was being seen, let it be by someone who underestimated how well I could act. But it wasn't just acting, was it? There was heat where there shouldn't be. Behind my knees. Along my ribs. Not because I was afraid, but because part of me, and I hate this, part of me was curious. What had he seen before this moment? Had he watched me sleep? Eat? Touch my own hair while thinking? Did he want to catch me doing something? Or was the act of watching already enough? There was a mirror across the room, and I let myself drift into its frame, not to check my reflection, but to imagine how he saw me. Not as a wife, not as a woman, but as a subject. My body didn't betray fear, it betrayed something worse, a shiver of awareness. I walked through the villa like through a dream I had half forgotten. Everything was silent, but the silence wasn't peace. It was coiled, like the air had been edited. My fingers brushed the edge of the marble counter. I left no smudges. I didn't want to leave prints, not even metaphorical ones. And I wasn't hiding, I was performing discretion. A woman pretending she doesn't know she's being watched, while wondering, deeply, darkly, why she wants to keep performing. Is this what she felt? The woman from the other life, the one who walked into a room that was already recording, the one who saw the signs too late, or maybe too soon. I don't remember her name, but I remember her posture, still, composed, aware that stillness was her only power. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The linen barely rustled. My knees close, my shoulders loose. A picture of unknowing poise. He would watch this later, I thought. Or had already watched. Was this now a moment from the past, or the future? And then came the crack. Not in the wall. In me. Because I felt it. The pull. The desire to do something out of character. To tilt my chin, part my lips, shift my leg. Not for comfort, but for provocation. To send a signal I would never admit to. But who was I sending it to? NNTHE man I married? Or the man who installed the camera? And are they still the same? The thought sat in my throat like lemon rind. Sharp, fragrant, choking. I swallowed it anyway. I got up. Slowly. Deliberate again. Walked to the edge of the terrace. Let the sun hit my cheekbone just enough. Let the hem of my robe lift in the breeze I wasn't sure existed. From this angle, I knew he would see everything. Not the obvious, but the choice, the knowledge. I didn't smile. That would have been a confession. I simply stood, breathing, letting the villa watch me, letting the silence record. Because if he wanted a performance, I'd give him a story he couldn't control. The sea was too still that morning, like it had been warned. The kind of stillness that made your stomach tighten. Not from beauty, but from something that didn't align. Light without shimmer, air without salt. I stood on the upper level of the villa, watching the horizon pretend to breathe. The robe clung to my damp spine. I hadn't realized how hot it was until the wind refused to move. And I walked to the pool not to swim, but to feel the edge. The tiles were pale stone, warm to the touch, almost human. I stepped out of the robe and let it fall behind me, like skin I didn't want anymore. My toes curled on the rim. The water was sharp blue, artificial, clean, and completely indifferent. I sat down slowly, legs folding in, until the water kissed my shins. The touch was neutral, like being held by a stranger who knows your name. There was a soundless hum in my chest. Not panic, not peace. Just a thrum. Like memory trying to surface but catching on something slick. I sank deeper, letting the water climb up my thighs, my stomach, my chest. I paused just before the shoulders. That moment where immersion is still a choice. That second where you can decide not to disappear. And then, I let go. My body folded in. The water sealed above my ears. The world thinned to vibration. Below the surface, everything lost detail. The sky was a smear of color. The tiles melted. My limbs became slow ideas rather than facts. But it wasn't silence. There was a strange auditory pressure, like something trying to get in. My heart pulsed against it. Stubborn, rhythmic, resisting. I opened my eyes underwater and stared at the distortion. This wasn't cleansing. This was erasure. When I surfaced, the air slapped me. It felt colder than it was, as if I'd broken into a space I shouldn't return to. The back of my neck tingled. Not from wet hair. From being observed. And yet the terrace was empty. Immaculate. The chair I'd placed near the hedge still untouched. The tray of citrus untouched. But the glass had moved. Barely. Just enough to suggest intention. Just enough to say, someone was here. And I didn't speak. Not even to myself. But inside, something recoiled. Not in fear, in calculation. I stood up slowly, droplets trailing down my thighs, converging at my knees. I reached for the towel, but didn't wrap it. I let it rest on my hand like an option. The villa had grown quiet again. Too quiet. Like a stage before the music cue NNTHE phone on the chaise lit up. Just a blink. A notification. But it wasn't mine. I don't bring mine here. It was his. He never leaves it unlocked. Except he had. This morning, before he left, almost as if, no, I dismissed the thought, even as my fingers itched to test it. I turned away from it. That was my mistake. Not because I should have looked, but because I wanted to. And now the wanting sat on my skin like salt. Sticky, abrasive, impossible to ignore. I walked back inside, slow, heavy with water. Each footstep whispered against the marble. Not guilt, something worse. Permission. Noun the robe was still on the floor where I'd left it, but it looked different now. Not casual, exposed, like it had witnessed something. I picked it up, not to cover, but to feel the fabric again. My skin beneath it felt newer, almost unfamiliar, as if watched. My body had learned a new posture. NNTHE glass on the counter, the one from earlier, had a lip print now. Faint. Not mine. Too thin. The echo of someone else's mouth. I felt my breath catch, but not out of shock. I didn't shatter. I absorbed, like I'd always known someone would cross the line. The question was only, when? And then I noticed it. The edge of the curtain, slightly drawn. The angle changed. Wider now, and in the depth of the room, a shimmer that wasn't light. Not exactly. More like lens. I closed my eyes, not to deny, but to locate. Myself. The moment. The version of me being captured. I opened them slowly. The camera was still there. Of course. That wasn't the shift. NNTHE shift was in me. I wasn't being filmed. I was filming back. Through movement, through silence, through choices. This wasn't surveillance anymore. This was exchange. The hallway carried the sound of my steps like it didn't belong to me. Every footfall echoed sharper than it should have, like the villa had grown smaller overnight. The marble floor was dry now under my soles. but the fabric of the robe clung with a residual dampness that reminded me of something unfinished. I didn't head toward the bedroom. I turned left instead, toward the unused wing where light didn't fall directly and the scent changed. Less citrus, more varnish and old dust, like a memory that had been polished but not erased. NNTHE corridor ended at the study. It wasn't locked, but it always felt forbidden. Not by rule, but by tone. The way some rooms say, "Don't enter," even with the door wide open. I stepped in. The air was different. Cooler, still. The rug swallowed the sound. This was the kind of room designed for power to happen in silence. A single window, half covered. A decanter, untouched. Papers aligned too perfectly, which meant something had been moved. I didn't sit. I stood in the center, letting the stillness press against my arms. There was a camera in here once. I knew it. Not because I'd seen it, because I'd felt it. And now that feeling was gone. Not because the watching had stopped, but because it had relocated. Watching had evolved. It wasn't static anymore. It was choiceful. Selective. Intimate NNMY eyes traced the bookshelf, spine by spine. Titles I never touched. Subjects I never asked about. But one was new, or rather displaced. A biography out of sequence. I reached for it. Not out of curiosity, but out of pattern recognition. The kind of instinct women aren't taught to trust. The book pulled away too easily. Behind it, a key. Simple, metal, ordinary. Which made it dangerous. I didn't know what it opened, but I knew what it unlocked in me. Something like hunger. Not for knowledge, for clarity, for symmetry. If he was looking into me, I wanted to see the reflection. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. I slipped the key into the pocket of my robe, the metal cooling against damp skin. I didn't shiver. I adjusted. NNTHE mirror above the fireplace caught me at an angle. My reflection looked older in that light. Not aged. Aged out. Like innocence had been ironed away. My mouth looked composed. My eyes didn't. They held something unsaid, like a sentence waiting for a verb. I held that gaze. Let it press into me. I thought of her again. The woman from the other life. The one who played roles she didn't audition for. And I moved toward the bedroom now. Not to rest. To resume. The robe fell to the floor in that specific way fabric does when it knows it's not needed. I walked to the closet, not mine, and opened the second door from the left. The one he thought I never used. Inside, pressed shirts, lined jackets, and a box. Black, matte, unmarked. I touched it with 2 fingers. It felt like a decision. I lifted it. Inside, a device. Not new, used. Familiar in shape. The kind that watches without blinking. The kind you place in corners when you want to pretend it's not yours. I didn't feel betrayal. I felt recognition. Of pattern. Of need. Of the way power translates into observation. I closed the box. Not from fear. From calculation. That time I left it where it was. But not as it was. A slight turn. A subtle displacement. Enough to make him feel the shift without knowing what it meant. Let him live inside the uncertainty he crafted. Let him wonder what I'd seen. Let that be the new surveillance. Downstairs, the light had shifted again. Late afternoon now. The kind of hour where shadows lengthen with intent. I sat on the chaise by the open window, hair still damp, skin still flushed. My thighs stuck to the linen slightly. That imperceptible pull when skin meets fabric in heat. I didn't adjust. I let it hold. Enya's car pulled up the gravel. Not fast, not slow. That measured rhythm of someone who owns the space they're entering. I didn't stand. I didn't hide. I stayed. Still. Lit. Open. Because this was now the test. Not of innocence, but of awareness. The door opened downstairs. A sound I knew too well. I could chart his footsteps before he took them. The hallway creaked in that one place near the sculpture. NNTHE villa wasn't mine. The camera wasn't mine. But the moment? The moment was entirely mine. I heard him before I saw him. Not the sound of his feet or the rustle of fabric. The shift in air pressure, the temperature recalibrating itself to accommodate another body. The villa inhaled. My spine caught the draft first, a cold trace along the curve of my back where the robe had parted and never been retied. I remained still, but something inside me had already repositioned. Not in defense. In focus. NNHE didn't call out. That was his ritual. Silence first. Observation second. Contact only if necessary. I could feel him at the threshold of the room, not stepping in yet, not disrupting the frame I had constructed. I sat as if unaware, letting the golden light slope across my thighs, my clavicle, the inner crook of one arm. My breath was shallow but paced. The air between us began to thicken, not with tension, but with potential. When he entered the room, he didn't speak. Of course he didn't. He walked past me, a half loop around the periphery, never too close. The scent of his cologne arrived just before he did. Something dark and subtle, like oud layered over unfinished wood. It didn't fill the room. It curled into it, like smoke from a slow burn. My skin read it before my mind did. Every fine hair along my arm stood in alignment, like iron to magnet. NNHE stood behind me now, close enough that the warmth from his body softened the air across my shoulders. I didn't turn. If I did, the spell would shift. The balance required exact stillness. In that pause, I realized this was the moment the camera couldn't hold. There are no lenses for what breath does when it touches another's skin without contact. NNHI's gaze was weight. Not heavy. Dense. Like gravity bending specifically around the shell of my ear, the dip in my collarbone, the curve of my spine where damp fabric clung like consent. I tilted my head forward a fraction. Not to yield, not to invite, to acknowledge that he was real, that I was real, that this wasn't footage anymore. It was evidence. NNHI's fingers didn't touch me. But I felt them. The outline of them in air, like static or memory. I imagined them trailing the path from my nape to the line of my jaw, and my breath responded. Not in longing, but in resistance. Not rejection, resistance. Because desire that isn't asked for feels like trespass, even if it's wanted. NNI exhaled. Slowly. Controlled. Letting the sound of it replace any word that might have filled the space. My hands remained folded on my lap. My knees drawn together. I was a portrait of neutrality, but my pulse betrayed me. It climbed. Not fast, but deliberate, like someone walking up a staircase they built themselves. NHE moved again, a subtle step to the left, enough that I could see him now in the edge of the mirror across the room. His reflection didn't meet mine. He looked at the space between us. And something about that broke the scene, not violently, precisely, like a thread being pulled from silk. Slow, quiet, irreversible. And I stood, not abruptly, like tide rising. My body stretched out of the pose I'd occupied, leaving a phantom shape on the chaise. I didn't face him. I walked to the open window instead. The air outside was still thick, but less watched. I placed my hand on the frame, metal warm from the sun. My shoulders dropped a fraction, the first visible sign of release. Behind me, he didn't follow. He stayed in the space I had exited, as if holding my shape in the air. The camera was somewhere in that room, recording, but I knew now. It couldn't record what had just occurred. Not the change in barometric pressure between two ribs. Not the pause that tasted like decision. I didn't speak. Neither did he. That was the pact. That was the danger. The moment passed not with action, but with breath. And yet, nothing would be the same after it. NNMY's skin still held the imprint of proximity. My breath still carried the echo of assent. And my mind, it had catalogued everything in the sequence of sensation. Silk, shadow, silence, heat. I stepped away from the window. My reflection in the glass caught the light just enough to split. The sun slid lower, thickening the gold into something denser. Not light anymore. Lacquer. It coated the villa in slow gloss, turning every edge soft and every surface too warm to touch without flinching. I walked through the main room barefoot, the floor pulsing under each step like it had learned to breathe through heat. The towel I had once considered lay untouched on the lounger, as if modesty had expired. Night didn't go far. Just enough to drift. Just enough to test the perimeter of this new electricity. My skin was still damp where the fabric had clung, now drying in patches that mapped out where his gaze had stopped, turned, lingered. There was a tremble in the crook of my elbow. Not visible, but known. The kind of tremble that comes when your body realizes it has become part of someone else's architecture. The glass door to the side wing stood ajar. That door was rarely open. I pressed it wider with 2 fingers. The hinge gave no sound. Even time had been silenced here. Inside, a hallway I'd never walked fully. Cool stone, framed prints of places I didn't recognize, and air that hadn't moved in days. It smelled like cedar and faint musk. I stepped in, each tile a new trespass. The air narrowed behind me. Halfway down. A room, smaller than the others, more deliberate. A second study? Or a space for containment. There was a chair. Leather, old, worn perfectly in the center of the seat. Not functional. Chosen. A lamp low to the floor. A mirror tilted at waist height. I stood there, in the stillness, and felt the temperature of my own image. Heat hadn't left me. It had concentrated. Between shoulder blades. Along the line beneath the ribs. Inside my mouth. I wasn't aroused. That word was too public. Too scripted. This was something private, unspeakable, closer to ache than to hunger. I moved toward the mirror. Close. Close enough to see the wet line where my lower lip had caught between my teeth. Close enough to see my own collarbone shift with breath I didn't control anymore. This room wasn't meant for show. It was meant for witnessing. I touched the armrest of the chair with my fingertips. Not to sit, but to feel its history. The leather was warm, not from the sun, from memory. I felt it again. The hum under the skin. Like a magnet under the floor, turning muscle into wire. My breath stuttered. The robe slid from one shoulder. I didn't fix it. And outside, a bird made a single cry. Sharp. Too clean. I turned away from the mirror, suddenly aware that I had stayed too long, that the room had started to write itself into me. I walked back to the hallway with steps that tried to pretend they were casual, but the cadence had shifted. My hips moved differently, not performatively responsively. When I reached the end of the hall, I paused. The key in my pocket pressed harder now, warm from my body. I held it through the fabric. The pressure grounded me. This, I told myself, was still my choice. But the villa didn't agree. Its silence had changed pitch again, no longer holding breath. Now, watching, and I re-entered the living space. He wasn't there. The chaise empty, the air unsettled. Something had moved in the meantime. Not furniture. Tension. The shape of the room was off, like a line had been erased and redrawn closer. I walked past the tray of untouched fruit, past the book I'd placed on the counter 2 days ago but hadn't read. My fingers brushed its spine now. Not to open it, but to steady myself. An NTHE camera, still there, still aimed, still patient. My eyes didn't need it, but my body knew. Knew it was being absorbed, pixel by pixel, into someone else's memory. Not because I was naked. I wasn't. Because I was open. And in that openness, a danger. Not to him. To me, and because I didn't want to close again. NNTHE glass door to the pool had fogged slightly from the shift in temperature. I placed my palm against it. The warmth left a mark, soft and spreading. The villa reflected in the smudge. As did I. Not as I was this morning, but as I had become. Something blurred. Something exposed. Something that had stopped asking permission. The evening light dropped too quickly, as if the sun had grown tired of watching. The villa turned blue, not soft blue, but dense, metallic, the color of silence just before a siren. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, holding a stemless glass with nothing inside. My fingers curved around it out of habit, not thirst. The gesture felt borrowed from a memory I hadn't yet had. There was music faintly playing in one of the distant rooms. Low, instrumental, something meant to soothe. But instead it reminded me of hotel lobbies at midnight. Polished, half empty, suspended between intentions. I used to think quiet was calming. Now I knew it could sharpen. Especially when layered over unsaid things. NNMY bare heel scraped the corner of the rug as I shifted weight. The sound, barely audible, still sliced the space with more force than words ever could. I set the glass down. It made no sound. Too clean. Too controlled. I turned toward the corridor without knowing where I was going. The robe was belted now, loosely, like an afterthought, like a ribbon around something already opened. NNH. Halfway down the hall, I passed the mirror. The same one from this morning. But this time, I didn't recognize what it reflected. My posture had changed. My face held something behind the eyes. A withheld flinch. Not quite fear. Closer to recollection. My fingers hovered over my collarbone. That place where breath used to land in someone else's presence. Not his. Not yet. Someone before. NNTHE scar was faint. Just under the edge of skin, near the shoulder. You'd only see it if you looked for it. And no one did. But I knew it. I remembered how it got there. A sharp edge. A sudden shift. A word said too loudly in a place too private. The aftermath of closeness turned careless. He never meant to. That's what I told myself then. The echo of that sentence still burned in bone. Now I kept walking. Not away from it. With it. The villa had doors I hadn't opened yet. Not because they were locked. Because they held temperature. Memory has scent. And those rooms carried it. I entered the one near the end of the hallway. Dim. Wood paneling. A single chair. And on the sideboard. The watch. NNHI's watch. Not worn today. Left here like an anchor. Heavy, matte, familiar. I reached for it, then stopped. Not because I didn't want to touch it. Because I remembered how it felt against my thigh once. In a moment, I never told him I remembered. The metal had been cold then, too. It left a mark that faded within hours but stayed in the muscle longer. I sat in the chair. Legs folded. Back straight. Not waiting. Reconstructing. The silence here was thicker, not empty. Loaded. I ran a finger along the inside of my wrist. Traced the pulse. Not to calm it. To feel it. The rhythm wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the architecture of this day. And to the body I had become inside it. An NTHE scent in the room shifted slightly. Air. His air. I didn't turn. He didn't speak. That wasn't how this worked now. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not to block, but to see differently. Behind the lids. Movement, breath. The way his presence bent the oxygen. I felt the molecules change against my cheek. NNHE was close, but not touching. The kind of closeness that rewrites memory without adding any new scenes. I imagined his hand reaching forward, stopping just before contact. That ghost of warmth. That almost weight. The intimacy of not quite nigh stood. He remained still. I passed by him slowly. Let the robe graze his silhouette, though we didn't meet. The static that sparked was real. And it lingered. Down the hall, into the bedroom, I walked like someone following her own echo. Each step a response to something I hadn't said aloud. And inside, the lights were low. Not romantic. Intentional. Shadows layered over textures. The edge of the bed, the line of the curtain, the curve of the chaise. All redefined by absence. I paused by the mirror once more. This time, I met my gaze fully. No flinch. No disguise. NNTHE woman looking back wasn't wounded. She was aware. And in that awareness, a trace of the girl she had been before things were seen, recorded, repeated. She hadn't disappeared. Just changed lighting. The bedroom was warmer now, though the windows were open. The air no longer moved. It pressed. Heavy. Slow, as if it too was waiting. I stood in the middle of the room, not facing anything. Just being. The robe slipped from my shoulder again. Not dramatically. Gently, like breath exhaling through fabric. I didn't fix it. Outside, the sea had darkened into ink. No shimmer. No horizon. Just mass. I could no longer separate sky from water, or inside from out. My body responded to this blurring. Shoulders softening. Spine lengthening. knees no longer locked. I felt it, that internal turn when the line between watching and wanting dissolves. The room behind me creaked slightly. Not from weight, from tension. He was there, not moving, but shifting in space. His stillness was louder than any gesture. It pushed against the air between us. My back felt it first, a slight change in density near the skin, as though my body could read shadow as intention. And I stepped forward. One slow step, not toward him, toward the edge of the bed. The sheets were undisturbed, crisp. I reached down and ran my palm over the corner, pressing lightly, feeling the resistance of the mattress beneath. Cool cotton. Too precise. I imagined the weight of a body here. Not mine, not his. Just the memory of presence. NNMY breath caught. Not visibly. Inside the chest. A subtle stutter. A held beat. The kind of pause that becomes a decision. I turned slightly, enough to see him without facing him. He was still in the doorway. Watching. Not intruding. His hand rested against the frame, casual, but the fingers were curled. Tension disguised as ease. Our eyes met. Not directly, through reflection, through fabric, through the pulse that passed between collarbones. I didn't move. I didn't invite. But my silence did. Every inch of restraint between us now hummed like stretched wire. If either of us exhaled too hard, it would snap. And I sat on the edge of the bed, spine straight, legs crossed at the ankle. The robe shifted higher on one thigh. I didn't pull it down. I placed my hands beside me on the sheet, pressing into the fabric, grounding myself. My breath deepened. Not louder, but lower. The room filled with it. A quiet tide, rising NNHE, stepped inside. No sound. But the air told me. The shift in temperature, in scent. His presence spread like heat along a glass. I didn't look. I felt. Behind me, he moved closer. Still no contact. But I knew his outline now better than my own. My body leaned back the slightest degree, enough to tilt without surrendering, enough to signal, and I closed my eyes. And in the dark, sensation. The sound of his exhale filtered through restraint. The way tension restructured the molecules around my cheekbone. The awareness of skin just out of reach, that proximity hotter than any touch. I breathed in through my nose, slowly, and tasted the salt of my own shoulder. Then nothing. A long, perfect nothing. He didn't move. I didn't speak. The silence broke open, not from noise, but from density. My hands gripped the sheet, my jaw unclenched, my thighs pressed tighter, not in denial, in containment. My whole body became a vessel for sensation denied. NNTHE robe fell completely then, pooling around my waist, like a question asked without voice. I didn't cover myself. I didn't perform. I remained. In that exposed stillness, I wasn't vulnerable. I was inevitable. The way fire is inevitable, when air leans too close to flame. NNHE took one step closer. Close enough now that my skin read his breath like code. My shoulder blade trembled. Not from fear. From recognition. This was the moment the footage could never capture. Not the image. The voltage. The betrayal wasn't in watching. It was in not understanding what the image meant. And now we both did. NNHE didn't touch me. I didn't ask him to. But in that moment, we reached an agreement without language. He had looked into me. And I had looked back. The power wasn't in who moved. It was in who didn't need to, and NNMY head tilted. My eyes opened. His were already on mine. The room didn't move, but everything inside it had shifted. The air was too still, like it feared creaking under the weight of what had just not happened. I remained seated, the robe loose around my waist, my skin adjusting to the exposure not with shame, but with recognition. The kind of exposure that tells you, yes, this is what it means to be real. NNHE hadn't moved, and yet his nearness filled the space with aftermath. Not consequence. Resonance. as if my body had been tuned to a frequency I hadn't known existed until he occupied it. My back still faced him, but I could feel every detail of his silhouette vibrating against the silence behind me. The silence didn't empty, it pulsed. The corner of the bed creased as I shifted slightly, knees bending, one foot rising onto the frame. My inner thigh pressed against the linen, warm now from breath and stillness. I ran my palm lightly down that thigh. Not seductively. Reflexively. The way you touch a bruise to remind yourself it's real. My fingertips paused on a spot just above the knee. A memory held in skin, NNTHAT room earlier, the one with the mirror at waist height, returned to me in full detail. Not as a thought, as a sensation. I remembered how the air had thickened at my ribs, how my own reflection had looked back with something halfway between question and dare. And now, here, in this room, that question echoed louder. And I stood slowly, unrushed, as if each muscle had its own language for aftermath. The robe fell silently. I stepped over it. Naked, yes, but not exposed. Covered in the residue of intention. My breath didn't catch. It deepened. My hands were no longer decorative. They became instruments of balance. And I crossed the room to the dresser, not out of purpose, but out of need to change my proximity. His gaze followed. I didn't see it. I knew it. Like you know when the tide has turned even before the water touches your ankles. My shoulder blades tensed, not in resistance, in preparation. My chest rose once, slow, my collarbones stretching the air. The mirror caught the movement, doubled it. And outside, the sky collapsed into full night. No stars yet, just indigo weight, pressing from above. My nipples hardened in the cool air, not from cold. From attention, from the echo of restraint. I didn't cover myself. I stood still. Let the temperature write its name across my skin. NNHI's footsteps behind me were deliberate. Not heavy, but meaningful. 1, 2, close. Then pause. The exact rhythm of a decision being made, not with words, but with breath. I didn't turn. My fingers touched the edge of the dresser, anchoring me. The wood was smooth, lacquered, too clean. Like a secret just wiped away, NNHE stood behind me. The heat of him outlined my spine. His hand rose. I felt the change in the air before I sensed it near me. But again, no contact, just the possibility of contact. A proximity that demanded stillness. I tilted my head slightly, hair falling to one side, exposing the nape of my neck. The most vulnerable place I had left. NNBUT still. No touch, and only the heat, the air, the knowing. And then he stepped back. NNNOT far. Just enough. The aftershock vibrated through the soles of my feet, through the soft center of my belly, through the pulse between my legs that now throbbed not from desire but from the suspension of it. I exhaled, and in that exhale I let the moment end. NNNOT break. End. Like a note held too long, finally leaving the instrument. The quiet didn't return to normal. It returned transformed. I turned around. Slowly. No drama, my arms at my sides. My body entirely still. And he was there, fully clothed, but no longer concealed. His jaw clenched. His eyes wide, not in lust, but in realization. He had watched. I had let him. And neither of us would be the same again. NNHE stepped aside, and I walked past him. Not faster. Not slower. Just enough to mark that a line had been crossed. Not in the body. In the air. In the permission no one had asked for, and no one had denied. NNTHE hallway waited. Cool again. My skin responded. Not with chill, but with imprint. The touch that never came had left more mark than one that might have. The hallway cooled me like stone after fire. My skin, still bare, still humming, no longer burned. It retained the heat the way marble holds sun. I walked slowly, not from hesitation, but to listen to the shift inside me. There was no rush now, no pursuit, only this echoing stillness that followed me like breath behind glass. My hand brushed the wall as I passed, fingers trailing the plaster for texture, for proof. It was dry. Real. Here. And I stepped into the marble-tiled bathroom, light already on, warm and low. The kind of glow that forgives. I saw myself in the full-length mirror without flinching. My body, unclothed and loose, carried none of the tension it held this morning. The marks of restraint had vanished from the surface, but inside, the rhythm was altered. My thighs no longer pressed together. They had relaxed. Not in exposure, in release. I reached for a towel, not to cover, just to wrap. Ritual. A way to signal to the body that the scene had ended, even if the tension had not. I sat on the edge of the tub, knees drawn up, arms around them, resting my chin between. This position, the echo of childhood baths, of silence after storms, reminded me how long I had known how to wait, and how different waiting felt when you were no longer afraid. My breath slowed. My hair damp with old sweat clung to my neck, like memory unwilling to fade. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, not to dream, but to listen. The sound of the sea returned, faint, filtered through walls, constant, insistent, and when I stood again, the towel had imprinted lines across my skin, temporary patterns, like static left after contact. I ran a hand over my thigh and watched the red marks fade. The pleasure hadn't been in the touch. It had been in what we both didn't do. In the choice to stay within the edge and feel it like a wound. I dressed slowly, not seductively. Cotton underwear, thin slip. No bra. My body didn't want armor. It wanted aftermath. An NTHE villa was quieter now, as if it had exhaled too. I walked barefoot across the tiles, the coolness rising through my arches, spine tall. The kitchen held the same glass I had set down earlier. Still empty. Still mine. I picked it up, filled it with water, drank slowly. It tasted metallic. Real. It hit the back of my throat, with no sweetness. I liked that. My body didn't need comfort. It needed acknowledgement. I returned to the chaise where the robe still lay, crumpled and warm. I didn't touch it. I sat beside it, crossed one leg over the other, looked out through the open doors. Night had finally taken hold. No stars, no narrative, just blackness. The kind that absorbs thought without echo. I breathed. I blinked. I remembered. There was a time when being seen made me flinch, when the gaze of another felt like extraction. Not now. Tonight I had stood still in the eye of someone else's want and hadn't disappeared. I had stayed. And in that stillness, something inside me had taken root. Not love. Not even desire. Recognition. The most dangerous intimacy of all. Nye reached for my ankle, fingers wrapping gently around the bone. The pressure grounded me. I tilted my head back and stared at the ceiling. Smooth, white, indifferent. It would never tell the story. But my skin would. Tomorrow, or later, or years from now, it would remember. In the way my breath changed when someone stood too close. In the way silk would feel like consent or caution, depending on who held it. And I didn't think of him. Not directly. He was part of the air now. A frequency absorbed into the villa's walls. What mattered wasn't him. It was what I had become in his presence. And more than that, what I had allowed myself to feel without performance. The most private thing. The luxury of unhidden want and I stood again, not because I needed to move, but because the chaise could no longer hold the shape of me. I walked to the window and leaned against the frame. The breeze, barely there, touched the damp strands at my neck, lifted them slightly. I closed my eyes again. Not to retreat. To stay longer in the space between. The villa at night became something else. Not refuge. Not theater. A container. The kind that holds not events, but reverberations. I walked through it now as if through the ruins of a moment, barefoot, the hem of the slip brushing my thighs like breath with memory. Each room I passed had stored some part of me, not scenes. Sensations. The sharp coolness of stone. The damp press of cotton. The invisible pull of an unseen gaze. Yenny paused by the door to the room, with the chair and the mirror. It was closed now. Not locked, but sealed in meaning. I didn't enter. I placed one hand flat against the wood, as if checking for heat after fire. The surface was cool, dry, but beneath it I could still feel the echo of what had almost happened, and what, in its restraint, had left more mark than touch ever could. In the hallway mirror, I met my own eyes again. No softness. No apology. A kind of clarity had settled there, like dust on glass. This wasn't about beauty. Or risk. Or even seduction. It was about the brief second when someone sees you not as you perform, but as you are. And that second, held long enough, becomes unbearable and unforgettable in equal measure, and I stepped outside onto the terrace. The sea no longer called. It loomed. A vast, dark plate of silence. The air was cooler now, wrapping around my arms and thighs, lifting the fabric of my slip in breath-like movements. I didn't resist. I stood there and let the night measure me. Let it read the shift in how I carried my shoulders. The new weight in my hips. The slight bend in my knees from a tension that had never released. I wondered what the footage would look like. What the camera had recorded. Not the image. The tension. The way my body had paused in doorways. The way breath had caught in my collarbones. Could you see that? Could you see when the skin wants something before the mind permits it? Could you track the moment a woman stops hiding, not with exposure, but with stillness? Behind me, the villa remained silent. I didn't know where he was. It didn't matter. The proximity had done its work. This was no longer about him. It was about the imprint. The sensation of being seen without demand. The danger of not looking away. My thighs tightened briefly. A flicker. Not arousal. Memory of arousal. The way an echo keeps vibrating after the voice has long gone. And I sat on the stone ledge, one leg folded beneath me, the other dangling. The slip clung to my ribs, sheer in places where the night air had found dampness. I tilted my head back, looked up. No stars still. Only one thin cloud like a scratch across a black lens. It felt right. This wasn't a sky for answers. It was a sky for aftermath. I touched my neck lightly, tracing the spot where I had first felt his breath. That impossible moment of closeness without contact. My skin remembered. My spine straightened under the memory, not because I missed it, because it had altered me. This, I knew, would return in some other life, in some other room, with someone else, and I would flinch differently. Or not at all, and I breathed out. There was nothing left to anticipate. No more turning points. The story had happened already. In the rooms, in the tension, in the restraint. The moment had passed. But its shape remained, like the print of a hand on glass after steam. And I stood. An N-T-H-E terrace behind me held the faint warmth of stone. The sea refused to speak. The night didn't need to close. I didn't need to know how it ends. And I walked back inside without looking back. My skin had already recorded everything.